Good evening and welcome everyone to our Wisdom Wednesday. My name is Atlantis Browder and I will be stepping in tonight for our usual host, Ajua. And she may be joining us a little bit later on this evening, but I'll be here filling in for her. So I'm excited to be here with you all this evening. And again, welcome. And of course, I have to do things as my sister Aja would do, which is to give some special shout outs. We love to acknowledge who is in the virtual house with us tonight. So if you haven't already, make sure you put your name in the chat and tell us where you're from so we can give you a shout out. So far we have Louisiana in the house. We have Clearwater, Florida in the house. We have Fairburn, Georgia in the house. We have New Jersey in the house. We have DC in the house, Atlanta, Philadelphia, Northern Virginia, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Arlington, Texas, Inglewood, California, South Florida, Patterson, New Jersey, Bowie, Maryland. All right, you all are in the house tonight. Lawrenceville, Georgia. All right. So thank you everyone for taking the time to be with us this evening. We have a very special guest in the house. His name is Dr. Jerome Page. And before we bring Dr. Page on the screen, I'm going to take a moment to highlight the presentation for tonight and give a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll bring him on to get the show started. So, tonight's presentation is called Reclaiming Judgment: The Weighing of the Heart as Maturity and Method Coherence, 78, The Science and Art of Turning. Judgment fills modern life. Courts decide. Markets rank. Algorithms score. Institutions evaluate. Balance, however, continues to erode. The problem is not the absence of judgment, but the loss of measure. Speed has outrun responsibility. Decisions land without repair. Ma'at offers a different architecture. Ancient Kemetic thought treated judgment as measure rather than punishment and refused exemption for power. Kings, institutions, and authority all stood beneath the scales of Ma'at, that is. Judgment became something that could be weighed. So tonight's presentation is a part of Coherence 78, The Science and Art of Turning, an inquiry into how judgment recalibrates under scale, speed, and systematic distortion. Two linked frameworks anchor Dr. Page's work. The Weighing of Judgment Maturity model, which shows how judgment develops from force and rule through performance, care, proportion, coherence, and open coherence. The Weighing of Judgment implementation model, which provides a method for acting once imbalance becomes visible. Together, these models restore the weighing of the heart as a practice rather than a metaphor, and judgment gained both diagnosis and method. Witnessing, refusal, realignment, moral invocation, and sovereign coherence guide action across scale. In an era shaped by private equity state capitalism and algorithmic decision-making, the work argues for better tuning, not louder judgment. Judgment turns back towards measure. Balance becomes possible again. That is powerful. I'm excited for tonight's presentation, and I'm sure you are too. So here's just a little bit about our speaker tonight. Dr. Jerome S. Page is a writer, forensic economist, and reflective practitioner whose work explores judgment, coherence, and human dignity in times of moral strain. Writing as the Meditativist, he draws on African ethical traditions, family history, political economy, and spiritual practice to examine how discernment survives when institution fails. His current work, Coherence 78, frames judgment as a practice of tuning, attending to balance, rhythm, and alignment across a lived life. He writes regularly on the Substack, and I'll be sure to put that in the chat for you all. But he lives right here and works in Washington, D.C. So without further ado, let's give a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Jerome Paige.
Hey, Atlantis, thank you, thank you, thank you. And hello to the IKG community. It's wonderful to be here. I'm excited to be able to share some of my new thinking on some issues I think would be important to everybody. Uh, for those who have joined, I have a link to my presentation that Atlantis can drop into the box. It's a link for viewing, and there's one link for downloading the presentation if you want to use it to follow along, or if you have to leave early, you'll have a copy of the presentation. So, uh, So the title of my session this evening is Reclaiming Judgment. And for those who are familiar with the Kemetic teaching of Kemet, Kemet, and then the teachings of Maya, there's the metaphor of, or relatively speaking, or somewhat called Judgment Day. Your heart is weighed against a feather. And the weighing of the heart, if your heart is light enough, then you will move into the field of reeds and experience a bountiful and wonderful post-life existence. So the weighing of the heart is both metaphor and it's also both practice in Kemet. So that's what I'll be doing is suggesting a way. So the concepts were developed in 3000 BCE, and what does it take to I want to update this concept of the weighing of the heart, and that's what I'll be exploring this evening. Uh, so my basic premise here is that, and I will begin to elaborate on these terms as we go through the presentation. Uh, what we're in what I would argue a post-Matian world where judgment has failed, and we are caught up in a lot of the political climate, the economic climate, issues of affordability, uh, issues of protests in the street. Uh, is what we're missing here from a standpoint of Ma'at is that how do we hold people and processes accountable today? Or if using the metaphor of the scale, how do we weigh things appropriately? How do we bring proportion back into our lives? And so my task this evening is to make this case to the argue that how we go about restoring judgment as a measure. How do we go about rebalancing power and responsibility, action and consequence, speed and wisdom? And in addition to developing that argument, I will introduce two tools. One is called the the weighing judgment maturity model, and the weighing judgment implementation maturity model. Uh, we've got about 90 minutes, and I'll spend some time setting things up, giving a historical background, going over the two instruments that I just mentioned, the WJMM and the WJIMM. Talk about some of the other concepts of this whole notion of weighing and what it means. Uh, Introduce the negative confessions and as counterweights and what would constitute negative confessions today, and then talking about how we go about living with a restored measure of judgment, and we'll end with some questions. So I'm not here to debate, even though what I'm here is to talk about how do we restore measure, and how do we go about reintroducing scales, the notion of scale, meaning the weighing of something back into contemporary debate. Um, Now, this issue of judgment, particularly from the standpoint of Kemet, uh, came to me or as an issue that I've been grappling with for some time. And it just so happened in 2025, the first part of 2025, I read a book by Mulanga Karinga, and it's called Ma'at, the Moral Ideal in Ancient Egypt. And it talks about classical ethics in Kemet. Uh, and one of the things that Karinga puts forth in his book is that Kemet was the first society that established a concept of judgment where, if we use contemporary language, all. And I sat with that. Why is it that this concept didn't exist before? And what happened to that concept subsequently? So I read the book. I read his book. It's dated 2004, but it was written much earlier. Uh, and I was struggling with this case. What does it mean that Kemet gave us the concept of judgment? Um, I'm an academic, so I kind of ponder those kinds of questions over the course of everything. Um, so now to put Karinga into some his book, even though it's the publication date is 2004, uh, the work was completed in the 1960s, and it was part of Karinga's doctoral dissertation. Um, And so the scholarship that he outlines in The Moral Ideal of Ancient Egypt, uh, you could see ultimately a lot of that became incorporated in his concept of Kwanzaa. Uh, but his book predated Kwanzaa. His book was, or not book at this time, it was his doctoral dissertation, was an integral part of the evolution of the Black Power era and the thinking. Um, and Oh, so if you could imagine, it's the early 1960s, it's the mid 1960s, and this young person shows up on a campus and says he wants to do his dissertation on the moral ideal of ancient Kemet, I mean ancient Egypt. Uh, there was very little what we call traditional scholarship around that. There are a lot of studies, obviously archaeology studies, and folks have been doing books on Kemet. But to establish that this society brought the concept of ethics to the world, and the concept that they brought to the world didn't exist before, and then after Kemet was overrun, it kind of disappeared afterwards. Uh, so yeah, so I kept asking, well, what is this contribution? What is this thing? What's so significant about judgment and nobody being above the rule of law? But again, it's the 1960s. Karinga not only, in order to make his case uh, to pass his dissertation orals and to have his dissertation accepted, he had to learn languages, he had to do archaeology, he had to study history. So his dissertation, which ultimately became published as a book, is a wealth of information and of primary sources to understand the thinking, the ethics of Kemet. Now, I would caution you if you want to run out and read it, it is not written for everyday people in the sense that it was written to convince other academics that this was a worthy study. The concept of judgment, the concept of ethics within Kemet. He ultimately, uh, Karinga ultimately, his dissertation was accepted. He went on eventually to become faculty member, I think, at one of the campuses in California, established a Black Studies program, uh, gave us Kwanzaa. But in this book, Mayat, the moral ideal of ancient Kemet, you can see the budding of his ideas. And I would love to put together a study group to work through his book at some point. Um, so what Karenga does is he tries to recover or restore uh, the teachings of Mayat. Now, for many of us, since we've come through the Black studies era and Africana studies, Afro-American studies, a lot of these concepts around Kemet are familiar. But at one point, they were not familiar from a widespread use. And so what Karinga was trying to do is to recover or restore these teachings of Ma'at, uh, and to prove that it was a coherent ethical system, and it was grounded in African antiquity. Wasn't grounded in Greece antiquity. It wasn't grounded in Western ideas, but it was a unique contribution to civilization and to the world. So where Karenga is trying to restore or recover Ma'at from the standpoint in the 1960s, what I'm trying to do is restore the concept of Ma'at here in 2026, where we're dealing with a rabid political environment, with a capitalist system that seems to be voracious, vociferous in terms of its attacks on people, maldistributions of wealth, issues upon issues. So how do we go about reclaiming uh, or recovering Ma'at in 2026? So if Karenga can recover or reclaim Ma'at in the 1960s, uh, what's the process of recovery, restoring, and reclaiming Ma'at in 2026? And so that's basically what my project is this evening, is to make the case of how we go about doing that. Uh, so to give a little history line here is that when we're talking about Kemet, the story picks up around 3100 BCE before. Now, for those who have studied Egyptian history or African history, one of the themes is that you've had these disparate groups, and the goal was to unify. And in terms of Egypt, you wanted to unify the West Bank and the East Bank. You wanted to unify the very forces that ultimately led to Egypt becoming a dominant culture. And so, in part, what was needed in addition to a political unification, you needed a moral unification as well. And the over of years, this moral unification became known as Ma'at and the teachings of Ma'at, the 42 negative confessions, the field of reeds, and everything. The struggle between Ma'at and Isfet becomes the ways of developing this unified theory, this unified moral universe. So one of the things that Ma'at does is establishes a governing principle. And it focuses on order. And the way you establish order is through proportion, truth, and accountability. So these become the guiding principles of what do we mean by Ma'at. Ma'at promotes proportion, truth, and accountability. If you don't have proportion, if you don't have truth, if you don't have accountability, then you have disorder or you have isfet. And we'll be talking more about that. So now, Kemet ruled the world for a while, and ultimately, due to imperial conquests, the culture got disrupted. And ironically, a lot of the teachings of Maya got absorbed into those countries and cultures that invaded that area of the country, of the world. So the concept of justice, the concept of no person is above the law, the figures of the balancing of scales, the statutes of liberty, that got absorbed, but ultimately usurped by not principles of shared understanding and proportion, but more principles of authority, if to simplify it, authoritarianism. So we'll talk about that as we talk about examples today. So Kemet and Maat declined because of invasions and subsequent an occupying of the area. And so, but what happened is we moved from a basic principle of a shared moral code to one of imperial law, a coercive authority, and a theology that's based on and sort of a revengeful and all-knowing God. So concepts of judgment continued, but this whole notion of measuring people to make sure things were in balance got lost. Imperial rule replaced proportion with command. Law replaced the weighing. Authority replaced accountability. And judgment became something imposed, not inhabited. So the later religious and legal systems kind of incorporated some of the teachings of Maya, but also at the same time bastardized those teachings. And so ultimately, where we ended up is that we have all these different theories and approaches to judgment, and they're competing with each other, but none of them embody the basic principle that Ma'at put forth, is that you need something to measure things against. They just can't stand out there arbitrarily. And the measure in Kemet, the measure with Ma'at was the scale. You had weight on, so you had a scale where you could put something of weight on one side of the scale and something of weight on the other side of the scale, and you would get this balancing or imbalance. And so the scale is a metaphor for balance, for imbalance, and then how it tilts toward one tendency versus another. And if there is no scale, if there is no measure, from a Martian standpoint, is that we have disorder and confusion. So the need for having something to anchor that is fair and just is not only important from a legal and political standpoint, but if you don't have the proper measures, if you don't have the proper weighing, then the society and everything around you will fall into disorder. And so the challenge becomes then how do you restore that order? And in order to restore that order, you have to come up with a new scale or a new weighing. So there are some core components of the Martian system. Ma'at focuses on balance, proportion, and moral measure. Isvet is the metaphor for disorder. If there is no counterweight, if power doesn't answer to anything, then you are in a Isfetian world. I just made up a term there. It's a world that's ruled by Isfet. Now, so we have Ma'at, which is balance and proportion and order. And then we have on that Isfet, which is disorder, the loss of a counterweight, no answers to power, and the world is out of balance. So the weighing of the heart is this weighing of basically the actions we take in life, the behaviors we engage in, and then to what extent do our behaviors lead to balance, proportion, and moral measure? Or to what extent do our behaviors lead to disorder? So the weighing of the heart is not a way of saying you'll get into heaven or not get into heaven. The weighing of the heart is a moral accounting of what impact did you have on the world. Did you leave the world a better place, or did you leave the world a worse place? Now, in order to live your life as a way to maintain balance, there are these 42 negative confessions. All societies have similar things like that. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, there's the Ten Commandments. In Buddhism, you have the Eightfold Path. You have the various codes across all societies, rules and regulations to follow. Within professional settings, doctors follow creeds, and professions tend to have ethics rules and develop those. But from a so the 42 negative confessions are basically saying the practices that you have done each day to make sure that your heart will be as light as a feather. I have not committed adultery. I have not robbed. I have not turned my back on a fellow person. Now, we don't have time to get into this, but in a lot of spiritual and mystical traditions, the way in which we express ourselves is through negative statements. So instead of saying I'm good, you would say I'm not bad, or instead of saying I'm happy, you would say I'm not unsad. Now, there's a lot of philosophical and mystical reasons for stating things negatively. Just in a nutshell, to say what something is assumes that you have all-knowing knowledge. And as humans, we're ultimately incomplete, not because of any fault, anything that is wrong with us. It's just that we just can't know everything. There's always a possibility that something might be out there that we didn't consider. So to protect from that, from a religious or a spiritual standpoint, you don't say what something is. You say what something is, what it is not. Um, Particularly in some of the uh, uh, Abrahamic kind of traditions, you can never say what God is, because to name God then would be sacrilegious and idolatrous. So you have to come a ways of talking about it without giving a positive statement. And I'll have some examples of negative confessions later on. And then the weighing of the heart is somewhat problematic for us who have been influenced by the Judeo-Christian view of the world. You know, I was like many Black people in America. I was raised Baptist and spent time in Bible study school, by Baptist training union, and Sunday school and church. And you begin to get these notions of heaven and earth, um, and that on Judgment Day somehow you're going to go to heaven, or you're going to go to hell. Those concepts aren't consistent with the Martian view of the world. So basically, on the day of judgment, they really want to know, did you live your life in balance? And one way to express a life of balance is this metaphor of a field of reeds. The reeds being things that grow up out of the water and on the land, uh, that that is sort of like a garden, a place where there's order, where there is a lack of animosity. For those who were raised on the Beatles, it would be a strawberry fields forever. And so when we think about these places we can go to where all is well with our souls, and the way to get to those places is to have lived a life of order, balance, and proportion. So what was Mott's contribution? Why is it important? What happened to it? How can it be restored? These are the questions that just kept going through my head for months. So if we divide the world pre-Mott, Mott, and post-Mott, we can get a sense of what the contribution was. Pre-Mott, most societies were ruled by power, by lineages, by force, and that whoever was able to exert the power, who was able to exert the force, was never subject to anything. So when Mott comes along, is that you not only must you that there's nobody above the there's nobody who can't be judged, even the Pharaoh. So from the most common person from the weakest person to the most powerful person, once you get to Ma'at, it says that everybody is accountable. There's no one who cannot be unaccountable. Nobody could avoid being weighed. And it wasn't just a principle, a philosophical or theological principle, but when you look at how the court system and the legal systems operated in Kemet, you see the decisions, the actions, the behaviors based on this notion that you must be accountable for your behaviors, regardless of who you are and what your station in life is. That was Ma'at's contribution. Before that, it was all arbitrary. Power was arbitrary. After Ma'at, or during the period of Ma'at, it says that you can't have a successful society that's solely based on power, that's solely based on people not being accountable. So pre-Ma'at, power, force rules. Ma'at says that, yeah, even the strongest must somehow be held accountable. And then once Ma'at gets absorbed in other societies, the measure, the scale, what people are accountable to and for changes. So judgment continues. A judgment continues to be practiced, but it is practiced in a way where there is no scale to weigh the ultimate outcomes. So what we have is judgment without the weighing. So pre-Ma'at, you have judgment without the weighing, or with Ma'at, you get judgment with the weighing, and then post-Ma'at, we go back to this judgment without the weighing. And we'll talk about examples of that as we develop. So we have this dichotomy, this view. On one side, there's Ma'at, which is balance, proportion, a field of reeds. Order is sustained by proportion, actions meet consequence. On the other hand, we have Isfet, where there's disorder, no counterweight, no consequences. Instead of having a field of reeds, we have a field of weeds. We have speed without consequence. We have power without answerability. So there are a couple ways to think about this. You could think about Ma'at on one side and Isfet on the other, and trying to balance those. But more importantly, the question is, what happens when balance is absent? What happens when there is no counterweights? What happens when there are no consequences for behaviors? So while we talk about a scale and we talk about balancing, we are modifying the metaphor to ask not so much about the metaphor of the weighing, but focusing more on the consequences. When you have proportion, life is easier. When you have a world where there's no accountability, life is hard. And so what we're beginning to do is take the basic fundamental concepts of Ma'at and putting them in more contemporary terms. So we can have judgment with the scale, and we can place with scale. We can have judgment with the measure. We can have judgment with accountability. And that would give us proportion, consequence. Power is made answerable. If you do something, you must be held accountable for it. Or we can have judgment without a scale, without a measure. And there you end up in a situation where actions are detached from consequences. And I think part of our challenge today on the political, economic, and social, and even religious clear, is that we have this widespread action detached from consequence. And so instead of being ruled by Ma'at, we're being ruled by Isfet. So how do we begin to put all this into kind of conceptual terms? So we have the concept of judgment, we have the concept of weighing. Then how does judgment learn to weigh? Getting back to our stages model, pre-Ma'at and post-Ma'at. Pre-Ma'at, what ruled was survival, force, rules, performance, intentions. Those were the guiding principles. Once we get to Ma'at, the guiding principles become based on proportion and balance. And then if we want to reintroduce Ma'at in this world of Isfet-like behaviors, we have to come back to a concept of what I'm referring to as coherence. We have to figure out a way to establish coherence and continuity in ways that allow us to hold on to ourselves in a world that is trying to pull us apart. So how do we live? How do we consume in a world that is trying to consume us? And coherence becomes a practice as an anecdote to help us get through that. So if we look, so we had pre-Ma'at, Ma'at, and post-Ma'at. And if we think about these as a stages model, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, or if we think about it as a pre and post model, we can begin to talk about the concept of judgment and the concept of measure over time. And this is a graphical representation that is based on what I call a stages model. So with each stage bit higher than the next, which ultimately leads us to a point where we can get an insight into all the previous stages and then to think about what's coming ahead. One of the liberating things about using a stages model is that there will always be a next stage. The world doesn't end. One of the premises I use for myself is that I'm an evolving being living in an expanding universe. So if I'm an evolving being living in an expanding universe, there will always be something new. If we come back to the notion of the stages model, let's talk about N-1 stage, then the current stage is being N, and then an N+1 stage. There will always be an N+1 stage. There will always be there'll be an N+2, N+3, N+4. It doesn't stop. The challenge is to understand what stage you're at, and then what does it take to move to the next stage. So if we look at this graphic as a kind of what I call the weighing judgment maturity model, the first stage is we rule by force. What determines who gets what is by force. And this is sort of a survival stage in human history. Then we move on. We get to the point where what determines who gets what is based on your performance. If you work hard, you get it. Your ability to produce, your productivity. So what determines your place in the world is your outcomes. And then we moved to where we're not ruled by force or outcomes, but we establish rules to live by. Uh, we have things like the golden rule. We have things like the beatitudes if we're in the Buddhist world. Uh, we have our niyamas and namas in terms of ethics and right behaviors. So we have rules to live by. Um, and then and the focus is on order. Now, the stage one, survival, stage two, performance, stage three, order, uh, still focuses on individuals exerting their wills. Well, once we get to a, a, a Martian stage or a stage of the world, then we get to the point where we don't look at individual performance independent of everything that's going on. We look at performance based on some measures of accountability, justice, and fairness. And then we move on to focusing on proportion, things needing to be in balance. And then we focus on our intentions. And then there were always, what this says then is that we have all these possibilities that have been historically demonstrated about how we go about judging people and how we go about determining right and wrong. And we now have a way to assess which ones that we think lead to a society that is more inhabitable than not. And if we have these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 views of types of judgment, some with a measure and some without measure, because we're evolving beings in an expanding universe, there are going to be new versions of this, and we have to be on the lookout for those and whether they advance us as a society or not. And I'm quite sure there'll be some questions on this in the Q&A, which is fine. Again, I have a link to this presentation. If Atlantis can drop that into the chat, you can get a copy of the slides. There are two links. One is a link to review the slides if you just want to look at them on the web. The other is to download the whole package. And so if that's available to you so that you can look at them, you can look at them at your leisure. So how do we weigh? That's that's the fundamental question that we're constantly dealing with. So now we're in a different world, and our post-Martian world is what my brother and I refer to as pesky or private equity state capitalist. And it's a social system that it's based on extraction. It's a political and economic system that consumes, that breaks down barriers, that doesn't want any accountability. It doesn't want democracy. It doesn't want anybody telling it what to do. And you have this system of private equity state capitalism. And when you merge that with artificial intelligence, you get a new system of non-proportion, where everything is based on speed, where everything is based on anticipating the future, where everything is based on breaking down the barriers to capitalist control and to capitalist extraction. that there is nothing sacred anymore in terms of the ability to extract and exploit. And in our day-to-day language, we talk about optimization and efficiency. But these concepts of optimization and efficiency and are in a lot of ways are anti-concept of proportion. They are anti-concepts of accountability, because the only thing that matters is speed and money. Now, you could argue that that's one level of accountability, but if you begin to look at where the stresses are showing up in society, people's lives just don't seem to be as satisfying as they would like to be, even those who have sufficient income and means. That the way in which that there is no proportion left in society, there is no balance left in society. And if you've been reading the latest headlines of anything, there is no accountability. Everybody says that, well, we can just do what we want to do. Now, I'm not saying that from a kind of a libertarian view of people challenging the system, but from a standpoint that says that there are no rules and regulations that can control how I exert power. If somebody is just kind of a libertarian, free speech, free love person, what they're trying to do is express their individual agency, which is a good thing. But now we have a situation that says there should be no barriers to anything that I do or say. And that puts us right back into a pre-Marxian world, where ultimately there are a group of people, a group of ideas, which says that the way in which you manage society is through force. You manage society through power. You manage society by subjugating people. And those who are doing the subjugating are not accountable. That's pure pre-Marxian world. And so what we now have is, as we've looked at, or put it in another word, instead of saying, and that's pure pre-Marxian world, in one sense, it's post-Marxian in the sense that it's an ISFET world. It's a world of disorder. It's a world of non-proportion. And so that it's a world of confusion. The term that my brother and I use in some of our writings, it's a world of precarity. The whole world is run based on keeping people off balance and keeping people in a situation where they can't figure out what's next and coming. So, but once there are no rules, once there are no measures, once we live in a world of precarity, then the psychological toll, regardless of your income situation, is just enormous. And that people don't really get a sense of even how to enjoy whatever little material gains they have. The number one public health issue in the United States, in Japan, in England, and what we would call the advanced countries, the number one public health issue is loneliness. 5 or 6 years ago, England, in its ministerial positions, you have or cabinets. We use the term cabinets here. They established a minister of loneliness. It's a public health issue. Uh, they have a similar one in Japan. The chief public health officer in the United States several years ago issued a report on loneliness in the United States. So things are out of proportion. Now, so this is the world we're in. This is the world we have to figure out how to reestablish balance in. And what I propose here is the weighing of the judgment implementation maturity model. And we talk about this model suggests a way for reestablishing proportion, reestablishing coherence, reestablishing a weighing of the heart. So in the work that my brother and I have done on some other areas is that we've identified 5 stages of, when we looked at it in terms of private equity state capitalism, of ways to resist. And I've taken that model of ways to resist and transformed it into a reframing of the weighing of the heart model. And there's in our book, and that's listed in the citations in the PowerPoint. There's a page for references. Again, for those who come late, there is 2 links, one for viewing the PowerPoint that we're looking at, or the slide deck, and then there's one for downloading it. So when we're trying to figure out what the hell, how can we deal with all this madness that's going on, and it can be overwhelming. So the first response is to hone our capacity and skills to see what's going on. We call that the micro response. It's the response to look around and see what we have as individuals that we can control, that allows us to bring a little coherence to our world. And these are small decisions. These aren't the big earthquake decisions. But at every given moment, we get a chance to choose. We get a chance to choose when we're going to spend our next dollar, assuming we have a dollar. We get a chance to decide how we're going to spend our time, who we're going to socialize with, what we're going to watch, what we're going to read. And here, I'm not trying to be judgmental or throwing shade on certain types of decisions. The key thing is to be aware of the decisions that you're making, regardless of what those decisions are. You have to be able to see what's going on and see how your decisions affect you and possibly others around you. So we have now all these calls for boycotts, Target, Amazon, big corporations. And to me, it's not whether these are successful in terms of toppling those organizations. Ooh, I wish they were successful in that way. But what it's doing is allowing people to stop and think about how they are using their time and money. And that's the important part of engaging in this process in order to bring about coherence, in order to bring about understanding measures and understanding the weighing of the heart. So the next level is that you can refuse not to participate in things. So we can form co-ops. You can do mutual aid activities. Uh, that if you want to begin to move outside of this thing, there are collective actions that you can take. And then you can begin to look at the sort of the, or we, in the case of the District of Columbia, we've got elections coming up. We've got people to vote for. Uh, we have to continue the resistance against the occupation here in the city. So we can begin to look at political forces and institutions to help move this accounting or reestablishing a measure of judgment. And then we can begin to look at those things that are beyond us in terms of our human capacity to understand that we're a part of a larger force. We're a part of a larger uh, set of historical forces. And then we can tap into those for guidance and understanding. And then we can then begin to uh, uh, organize our lives around these activities. So the first version of the weighing of the heart in the Martian view of the world is that we establish these that somehow these measures sit out as sort of a moral universe, and yes, they are. But we can now, in a world of pesky and AI and precarity, we now have to look at reestablishing these not as some ideal, but as a way of life and living from a day-to-day standpoint, inspired by uh, what took place in 3000 BCE and 2000 BC. So this is another graphic that we put together. We go from witnessing to refusal to realignment to redesign uh, to naming disorder, and by establishing the principles that are necessary to bring proportion back into life. And then we begin to live by those measures. This becomes the Martian imperative for today in order to battle the forces of Isfet. So there are a couple of things we can do here before we get to the end to get to the question and answers. The weighing judgment maturity model, which takes us from force to coherence, the weighing of judgment implementation model, which takes us from witnessing to a coherent way of living, become the two tools that we can now use to create this new weighing of the heart. The WJMM, the WJIMM become our ways of practicing Ma'at in 2026. And so there's some other slides here, but let me stop here and then we can open it up for question and answers.
All right. Hello, hello.
Hey, Ottawa.
Greetings. Greetings. First of all, greetings, everyone. Uh, it's Adjoa here.
Hey,
Happy New Year. Welcome to our first Wisdom Wednesday of the year. And I'm just going to come on camera for a second. I know I missed the beginning, so I just want to say greetings to everybody formally and Think Atlantis for starting us off. We are going to go into our Q&A session, so I am asking if you have questions for our speaker, Dr. Jerome Page, to please go ahead and post those in the Q&A box. And we're going to give the audience a few moments to get some questions together. All right. And while you all are getting your questions together, I do want to share some announcements. Again, thanking you for coming out to our Wisdom Wednesday. Next month, we invite you back out every third Wednesday of the month to our programs. And want to let you know that this Wisdom Wednesday and all Wisdom Wednesdays are located on Tony Browder's, Karak Browder's YouTube page. All right. And then at the end of the program, I will share some additional announcements. But go ahead and get your questions in. And Dr. Page, we're going to give everyone a moment to type those in.
Okay. And if you have
All
some
right.
questions, I can take yours as well.
Yes. Give me one moment. Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm trying to read some of the comments here. I struggling with my cataracts lately. So but yeah,
So, well, while we're waiting for some more questions to come in, I know I entered your presentation halfway through. But I love the topic of I came in when you were discussing Mayat and Isfet, and it's very, I think, apropos for our society today. What would you say if we're thinking about our community, the Black community, and the disorder, the chaos that's being kind of perpetuated around the world right now? If we're talking about globally, U.S. global policy, U.S. policy, what might be some recommendations for how we could manage ourselves in these times?
Right. Now, let me premise this by there are a lot of ways to rule. And one of the ways that, or the contribution of Mayat to the history was that ruling by force alone was disruptive and that you needed to balance that against something. We're in an area where we rule by precarity and by chaos. And that type of rule has gotten, I think generally speaking, it's hard to get our heads around it. Because we think about chaos, and that's partly implied in your question, that we have communities that are chaotic or that we have lives that are chaotic. And then what are some of the strategies we can do in order to deal with the confusion and the chaos?
Can I add to that? More so when, I guess, oppressive forces create chaos in our communities.
Right. Right. But
Yeah.
it's not just that, but this is the point I wanted to make. It's just not.
And around the world, really, but yeah.
Right. Right. So the governing model is to impose chaos. It's just to break things, to disrupt things. Because what that does is in the process of disrupting things, then you can seize power and control. They don't want any guardrails. They don't want the Constitution. They don't want the courts. And so that is one level of chaos. And I think this is a new level, a new type of chaos that we're witnessing, and we are challenged. So what have been the responses to that? And First of all, there's been the demonstrations. The second have been the boycotts. The third has been there's just a proliferation of mutual aid and self-help groups. One of the things we know historically is that when things fall apart, we have to return to ourselves as individuals, as collectives, in order to sustain what's going on. And so so first of all, we have to separate out this new governance by chaos model. And then how do we respond to that? And that's all the political actions that we're doing, everything from voting to suing or taking things to court. Then there's this whole issue of the chaos in our communities that have been perpetuated over years. And so there has to be both there has to be both a two-pronged approach. One is that we have to strengthen the institutions in our communities. Then we also have to take responsibility for our communities in terms of each one help one, for those with resources and not subject to the same types of chaos, going into the community and working along side groups, what's going on. And I think there is probably more going on than we realize, because you really have to kind of be a boots on the ground person. And I kind of relearned that over the last 12 months as I've gotten more involved in direct action on my part as my contribution to helping sort through things. So but then it also is developing the internal tools and practices. My moniker is the Meditativist. That's my Substack handle. And the reason I call myself the Meditativist is that I believe that we have to link internal calm with external action. And so to the extent that we continue to help people gain tools around meditation, relaxation, spirituality, and kind of each one teach one, is that we just don't leave it in the quiet of the meditation chamber or in the pew of the church or on the yoga mat. We actually then have to bring that into the community. So because ultimately the purpose is to change the world, and what we have to do is give us the capacity, the resources, and the knowledge to turn into action. Now, one of my favorite quotes is from Nelson Mandela. It all seems impossible until it happens. But what has to happen is that we have to keep working day after day after day on our own individual ways. We have to, in the fundraising world, there's time, there's talent, and there's treasure. We have to make sure we make our time, talent, and treasure available to our communities in order to help bring people along. But yeah, there are a lot of this disorder out there, and the confusion is intentional, both at the macro level as a governance philosophy and a destabilizing factor in the community. And one of the things that you hear when you go to demonstrations or you look at what's going on, say in Minneapolis right now, is that don't give them an excuse to shoot you. Now, this is not taking a nonviolent or pacifist approach. No, that's what they want to do. So don't give them that excuse. You have to figure out other ways to resist, but don't provoke them because you then will unleash even greater forces. Uh, and so to come back to your question, separate the chaos as a governance strategy, separate the chaos as a community destabilizing strategy, and then separate the chaos as something that we can then address individually, and then from those individual actions build to broader and broader collective action.
All right, thank you for that. So a few questions came in. I'm going to combine these next two questions, and you can determine if maybe they should be answered separately, but they kind of go together. So Robert asked, where does God fit into this situation? And then Mikkel asks, or has a view and wants to know your take on this view. Mikkel shares, I had to step away from modern Christianity to better understand the ancestral teachings connected to Ma'at. I believe taking time away from the church can be a necessary first step for brothers and sisters to truly absorb this wisdom. Whether someone is connected to the church or not, I believe Christianity is deeply indoctrinated into society as a whole. Do you support this view? So kind of taking the role of or the viewpoint of Christianity and also where is God
Sure.
in these
Yeah.
concepts.
Well, the last statement about stepping away, I think is very important. Uh, One of my approaches to knowledge is a comparative approach. I look at an idea across, so if there are 10 religious traditions or 10 mystical traditions, uh, then how do each of those traditions uh, express this notion of 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 religion or spirituality? Keep in mind that every spiritual and religious tradition has a creation story. In the beginning or before something, the religion and God only come into play once you're beyond in the beginning, once you get the act of creation. So we go from a one, or in the case of zero or nothing, the waters of Nuat, heaven, earth, whatever. And then there is something, we go from one to two. Then we get dualities. And then we go from the two to the many. And then we go from the many back to the two and back to the one and back to the zero. That's the arc of spirituality. What happens is that when I made that statement about negative confessions, is that once we name something, then that becomes the problem from my perspective, because then that takes on a life of its own. And so what you have is that we need ideas. We need concepts of what's beyond. We need, quote unquote, concepts of whatever we want to call it, God. But once we have that concept, that can be the most damaging thing that we can have, because then it blocks out all our understanding. And so part of life is about developing these concepts and then unlearning them. And so what we have to be careful of is that we can easily become a fundamentalist about anything. And the worst thing that can happen is to be a fundamentalist, because then you then crowd out at anything and you think your way is the right way. So to answer the first question, I don't have a need for a belief in God. It's not that I'm atheist. It's not that I'm anti-God or anti-religion. I think we have to have beliefs, but we can't believe. Because once we start believing, then we end up in a way where we are, in a very weird sense, uh, undermining the very things that we think we stand for. Uh, for me, the concept of God is a man-made concept, and I don't say that with malice or try to hurt anybody. Is that we have to make sense of the world. We create idols, and then once we create those idols, we then worship them. And I think it's the worshiping of the idols that gets in the way, and not the creation of the idols. And so what happens when we travel to different countries, or we read different books, or experience different people, we can see that ideas are emergent and ideas are contingent, and that they're useful at one point, and then they're not useful as another. Uh, that's why I find liberation and salvation in the fact that I view myself as an evolving being living in an expanding universe, because that leaves me open to be able to handle all that's coming at us in terms of ideas, and that anything that we have is ultimately going to come and go and pass away. But there will be something that sustains that over time.
Okay. Naja asks, this framework philosophy makes deep sense. How can people outside of this be exposed to receive, explore, and embrace these very real and necessary principles? With everything seeming to be upside down and such rampant behavior, everything seems to be out of balance.
Yeah, well, see, what happens is that uh, once things are out of balance, then the body, I don't know, the spirit, or if some people, and I'm comfortable with being saying this, if God will show you the way. And the one one of the things that you look at when you study history and you study the lives of spiritual beings, if we take, let's take mystical beings, spiritual beings, every tradition has this thing of the dark night of the soul, where there's just utter hopelessness and despair. And then whether it's the testing of Christ, or whether it's Buddha on the night of his enlightenment, or whatever. I mean, every there's a story about the dark night of the soul, and the dark night of the soul ultimately is one of those things where everything falls apart. The despair is not that the world is in disorder. The despair is that your understanding of the world is in disorder. So what's collapsing is not that it is. So what we then have to do is to create a new view of the world. Uh, so, for example, my view of the world is that there is no normal. Once I accept that there is no normal, then all this stuff is just part of what goes on. So what people are experiencing, yes, it's real. We don't have enough money. Affordability crisis is real. Um, People my age who are trying to figure out how to retire, those are real. But it's not the world that's collapsing. It's our concept of the world that's collapsing. It's our meaning that's collapsing. And so part of the challenge then is to reestablish meaning. Again, to do a religious parallel, in the beginning is the word, and if we want a new beginning, we need a new word.
Okay. Basil asks, the Maatian system seems to be well grounded. How can we actually get that system back, if possible, today in real time, in your opinion? And I'm going to combine that with Jason's question, which is, what are some basic steps we can take now in the witnessing stage to begin our journey with this system?
Well, one of them is you're taking it right now. You are you are expanding your own individual knowledge. You in Buddhist terminology, they talk about the three refuges. You take refuge in the Dharma, you take refuge in the Sangha, and you take refuge in the Buddha. And basically, what that translates into the Buddha is that you need to develop some role models. You need to figure out people who have been through the same similar things, and because they went through it, you too can go through it. So that's taking refuge in the Buddha. Taking refuge in the Dharma is you need a body of literature and ideas. This part of this discussion, part of the Wisdom Wednesdays is to giving you that, and then you need to take refuge in the community, the Sangha, and that's what we have here. It's a virtual Sangha now. For those in DC, we gather regularly at the Thurgood Marshall Center and other venues. But those are the concrete steps, is to start with your own mind, your own body, expand that to one or two other people. I'll give you an example of how this can operate. There was an art show down at one of the Smithsonian museums, and all this DEI stuff, and don't show anything about Black people. But there was one that was there, and it was the Black Arts Movement from 1955 to 1985. So I'm one of these people that says, it's been there. I'm going to go see it. I'm going to see it. And then suddenly it's the last day. And so when I go down to see it, it's normally crowded. So this was a couple of Sundays ago. And it's the west wing of the portrait gallery. That place was jam-packed. People were coming in that joint it was so many Black people in the museum that you would have thought somebody had put out an announcement to come, and I don't know what. What it was that I don't know how people got the word. I don't know whether it was the drum or the AM radio. It perplexes me. But that was an act of resistance from people all over DC, predominantly Black, coming to just witness the Black arts movement from 1955 to 1985, and also to show up to say that I am here, I am not backing away from my identity. It was one of the most profound and powerful statements of resistance. And there was no way to capture that in terms of news or anything. So at the same time, you've got this flood of Black people in the Smithsonian around 4th and, I don't know, Independence or somewhere. Across the street, there was this huge rally against the Border Patrol folks, because that's when the Minnesota stuff started first happening. And so you have these two types of witnessing. One, which we'd call a street demonstration. And then inside the museum, you had this silent witnessing of hundreds of Black folks at a museum witnessing art and feeling the energy of other people. My favorite saying, and I learned this late in life, is that despair is the dis-ease of the disconnected. If you're connected to yourself, if you're connected to somebody else, if you're connected to your family, your church, your community, times will be hard, but you won't have despair. Only those people who are disconnected suffer from despair. And so when I discovered that axiom that despair was the dis-ease of the disconnected, then we know what the solution is: reestablish connection.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to take the last two questions. So this is from an anonymous attendee. They asked if you could please elaborate on the idea of loneliness being a number one public health issue in the USA and Japan. And are there any places or references where that person can learn more information about that dilemma?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if they haven't scrubbed it from the website, but uh, uh, there was a report on loneliness released by I can't think of the chief not medical officer for the United States, but uh, yeah, there are studies on, you can just, in a strange world, you can just Google it, loneliness. And there are a lot of things that contribute to loneliness. And in fact, that loneliness has been a characteristic of capitalist development. And it pretty much was identified in the literature in the late 1900s. Um, and that particular phase of loneliness was that you had people moving from rural areas to urban areas. And so the collapse of rural life and whatever that means. And rural life can be mean, anybody who's been in rural areas, but also rural life has some kind of sense of community. And all communities aren't healthy communities, but it is a community. So I don't want to get here idealizing things. But this transition from the rural areas to the urban areas was the first major epidemic of loneliness in capitalist society and the Western world. Then you began to get industrialization, bureaucracy, uh, and then so people are in, and then you get into a kind of consumption where people are cut off from themselves in ways that are I would name as being unhealthy. And then we organize society around individuals. Now, from a historical standpoint, one of the greatest advances of Western capitalist development was the development of the nuclear family. We didn't always have the nuclear family historically, but the nuclear family gave rise to private property. And then what that then began to give rise to an individualism where everything became organized by the market. And once all life begins to get organized by the market, the human connections disappear. And that organizing around the market is on steroids under private equity state capitalism, where every aspect of our lives can be measured and monetized. And so part of the strategy is then how do you get off of the treadmill? How do you step aside? Or that's one, but how do you live inside of something that you know is ultimately trying to consume you? And that's the trick. And sessions like this and discussions and communities where more and more people are beginning to recognize or understand how to be part of it, but not consumed by it. And that becomes the key challenge that we all face.
All right, thank you. And someone asked if the logo on your shirt was for sale. So I'm not sure where you got it from, but I think someone likes the shirt.
My shirt.
So
All right.
yes.
So the story behind this shirt is that for my Substack, I'm called the Meditativist, and my logo is the feathers of my yacht with the ankh in the middle. I turned 78 in December of 2025, and I was working with one of my designers. I said, I need a logo for my 78th year, because for the last few years I have a project. And so this year is Coherence 78, the science and art of tuning. And this is the logo that goes with this. And my daughter was able to find some place that would put it on a t-shirt. So that's the origin of it. So it's only two of them, the two that my daughter, the two that my
Okay, so
daughter. But
okay, it's rare. So in
yeah,
other words, no, it's not for
well,
sale.
no, it's
Yes.
not yet, but
Not yet.
definitely.
Okay, okay.
Hey,
Never know.
if some, so that's the, so I'm 78, and you have the ankh, which is representative of life, and then you have the feathers of Maya, and so that's part of it. And in the slide deck, I have a slide on the logo and explains it in more detail. So for those who didn't get the links to the presentation, you can get those, and there's a slide that explains the thing. But thanks for the compliment.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, Dr. Page, how can people reach you?
Okay. The my email is jeromepage@gmail.com. So that's
Okay.
at JeromePaige @gmail.com.
All
I
right,
have
family. In the chat for you, Jerome Page at gmail.com.
right, and then I have a website called What's on Jerome's Mind
Dot.
and .com, and then I have a Substack at the Meditativist. So those are ways. And then there's a slide that has all that contact information on it as well.
Okay,
So if
wonderful,
somebody
wonderful.
downloads if everybody has access to the links, they can find me.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dr. Page, for a wonderful presentation. And thank you, family, for joining us. And I do want to just go over some announcements. We want to invite you to our next Wisdom Wednesday, which will be February 18th, and that will feature Dr. Nubia Kai, who will be speaking on African American sacred history.
Mm.
IKG, we would like to thank everyone who came out to support the wonderful book launch of Anthony Browder from the Browder File, Volume 3, A Browder Perspective. Tony Browder will be in Atlanta February 5th through the 8th, and he'll be in Tampa, Florida on February 14th. You can go to IKG's website, ikgculturalresourcecenter.com, to get more details about those book signings and lectures. And it will also be emailed on our IKG listserv. So if you're not on the listserv, definitely sign up so you can be aware of all the various activities and programming that we have. And we want to take a moment and, with sadness, announce the passing of one of our great master scholars, master teachers, great Jegna, Dr. Charles Finch.
Mm.
We extend our prayers of comfort to his family, and we do ask that everyone keep his family in your thoughts and prayers. So we just definitely want to extend our condolences to his family, to his deep connected friends. We know he was well loved throughout the community. So
So
again, we regret to inform everyone of that. However, we know that his spirit, his energy is now with the ancestors, and so may he journey well, and may he rest well and rest powerfully. Yes, give some great energy as he is being sent off to the
yeah,
next world,
and
the
he's
next
left
place.
behind a body of work to guide us.
Yes, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, thank you all for coming out. Dr. Page, we're getting ready to close out. As you can see, there are lots of hearts and claps coming through, celebrating this great presentation that you gave. Thank you for the work that you do. We
Thank you.
definitely appreciate it. And before we close out, I do want to turn it over to you if there's any closing remarks that you would like to leave the audience with for this evening.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I first of all, I thank you for the opportunity. I enjoyed presenting. I was no matter how many times I present, I still have old-fashioned stage fright. You know that just goes with the.
hmm
I hope that the ideas, some of them were because of the time, I think probably a little esoteric, but I tried to put it out there. But I guess the main thing I would leave with is that the teachings of Maya in 3000, 2000 BCE can be modernized to guide us today to deal with establishing measures so that everybody is accountable and
hmm
everybody must be judged and measured. And if we don't have a system of judgment and measure, then the world collapses.
Powerful, powerful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And special shout out to Sis Atlantis. Thank you so much, Sis, for opening us up with this year's Wisdom Wednesday. So that was a special treat that the audience received. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. That concludes tonight's program, and we look forward to seeing you next month. Peace.